entry rate throws in another 64,000 and change in our bucket. You will see from line 6 that we currently have 3 MLL students, grades 9 through 12. And based on that and the EPS weight, that's throwing in an additional 18,000 and change into that bucket. Any questions about disadvantaged and MLL?
I have a question. Couldn't we just, couldn't there be some sort of interface between the Department of Revenue and the free and reduced form? I know what money people have.
So we meaning business managers and superintendents have been talking to the department about an easier way of collecting data based on of families in need other than trying to collect alternative economic forms. It's not perfect. For years, they've talked about getting this information from the Department of Revenue. Revenue knows where everybody lives, and Revenue knows how much everybody earns. So collecting this data based on, for MSAD11, they would need the data from Gardner, West Gardner, Pittston, and Randolph. What we are being told is that the Maine Department of Revenue will not share this information with the Department of Education. And it seems like a head scratcher, right? They both are departments of the state. I don't understand, or we can't seem to understand why somebody can't force Revenue to share that data with education to get a better idea of our need or the needs of our families. But to date, that has not occurred.
Like a carrot and stick. I mean, that doesn't make any sense to not.
So it exists because if you so for Maine Care Advantage plans, so we talk about some of those Maine Care Advantage, they know the need of counties based on something, right? Because like if you enroll in Martin's Point, they can see that you live in Kennebec County that's deemed to be a needy county, and you may not have to pay towards your Medicare Advantage. So there is information out there. They are aware on a higher level of what the needier counties are in the state, or based on, I don't know what information they're using, but somebody ought to think of sharing it with education. I know a county information is different than having to carve it up based on each school district, because you'd have to carve up the county by the town and you'd have to parse it. But to date, we talk about it all the time, but there doesn't seem to be any movement about moving of Revenue sharing that information with education.
And it's not at all about sharing people's private info. It's really
Just
not.
want numbers.
Yep.
It's numbers and it's helping, it's one arm helping the other arm.
Yep.
It's too helpful.
Just too helpful. Yes, yeah.
It'll probably
Do we
cost
have
them more, cost the state more.
I mean, it's gotta be a way.
What that 0.45 is, I mean,
It's random. Some years,
People for not
it
working.
all depends on who's on the other end of that form. I mean, people are very, we had the same problem when we were passing around free and reduced lunch forms. So the kid brings the form in, hands the form to the teacher then hands it to the administrative assistant who hands it. I mean, what people earn is very private.
Very private.
Very private, right? So it used to be that the form was passing through several hands. We then transitioned to an electronic form where people could go in and actually do it, so the form wasn't changing hands. I thought that would be well received. It really, surprisingly, it was not. I don't know if there was, the problem was staff families having the technology to be able to access NutriKids through technology, but it didn't work. And then what forced all the wheels to fall off the bus is when the state decided, and I don't, it's a wonderful thing to decide to start making lunch and breakfast free for all students, right? Parents have no need to share that data, right? And we can beg them, telling them, it impacts us as far as our subsidy, impacts us as far as their grants, but there's only so much begging that we can do, and it all needs to be, there is a very short window to get it. So you think about the kids coming to school, and we need to collect that data, and Terry needs to have it. That's getting reported by October 1st. We are doing all of these reports at the beginning of the year, right? School is just, here's a ton of forms, here's one more, would you please share your financial information with us? Years ago, we used to raffle off, if you returned your data, we'd put all the names in, and we'd give away
An
like
iPad.
or an
Yep.
iPhone, right? To try to,
Yeah, we tried.
Yeah,
I don't think our numbers changed much at all, if I remember right.
nope.
It didn't really help.
You're right.
People are really private about that.
And so they should be. They should be able to be
I
very private
agree.
about it. I just don't understand why we can't. To me,
If
it
they can
feels
plug
like
an
a,
EPS weight of who knows what that is, you'd think they could come up with plug
yeah,
another number in, throw it up there. And standardize it across, at least by county or something.
I would think it would be very easy to collect all the tax returns and to sort them by town, like everybody's town's on it, right? And then just to add it up, and that's,
Give us the number.
that is what the average income is in Gardner, or.
and you can use AI and Google and find out what the
Well,
median and mode
It
is.
appears to be a Herculean task as far as the state sharing information from one department to another, but we have ongoing conversations,
Okay,
okay?
I know you're not forgetting it, but always a curiosity.
Yeah, it is. The next section is targeted funds. Again, they give more money for certain things, so the first section, lines 1, 2, and 3 is student assessments, and you can see the first column is the pupils from above, and then you'll see the EPS targeted amount for assessments is $58. So for each of our K-8, pre-K, and 9 to 12, they give $58 per student, and throw this into our invisible bucket. Pre-K, the next section, and targeted weights is 4, 5, and 6, which is technology resources. You can see that for elementary, they give $127 per student, and for 9 through 12, that they're giving $382 per student, which is barely the cost of a Chromebook, certainly. Terry, how much are Chromebooks these days?
They were $429, but they're going up.
There you go.
I'm quick.
There you go. So the state is throwing money into our targeted funds. They are giving us money to target towards technology. The next targeted fund area is K to 12 students, or K to 12 pupils. The state directs more funds for K to 2 students for things such as smaller class sizes, because fewer classes in a kindergarten class makes more sense, right? Right? So for K to 12, they have a EPS weight of 0.10, and so it's the number of students times the EPS weight times the elementary figure from the page 1. The next section, and I think it's really odd that they have another section on disadvantaged. So 9, 10, and 11 under targeted funds also deals with additional money for disadvantaged families. They are using the same count. If you look, they're not using our full pupils, but they're using the pupil multiplied by that 0.4532 figure. So that's where that's coming from. The weight in this section is 0.05, and that again is multiplied either by the elementary or secondary rate from page 1, throwing more money into the bucket. We do not have a pre-K to 8 isolated small school adjustment or 9 to 12 isolated small school adjustments. Those are things like, if you have a school on an island, they give you an adjustment because, exactly. Section 2, so if you add up all of the things in our bucket to date, now we currently have $17,284,825 in our bucket, but we are not done. I know, I'm sorry, Molly. So the next section is other subsidizable costs. These are where things like special ed come in and gifted and talented. So line 1 deals with gifted and talented. They basically deal with our expenditures. So quarterly, I have to do uploads to the state of all of our expenditures. Again, we do this 4 times a year in addition to our budget. So they have taken our 24-25 gifted and talented expenditures. We call that, you'll hear us refer to that as REACH. They've adjusted it by an inflation factor of 103.5%. So you can see that our base year expenditures was $227,824 multiplied by this inflation factor. They're throwing another $235,000 in change into the same bucket. The next section is special ed EPS. And Katie and I took Katie on a wild journey this afternoon trying to show her
Fun you had.
That was exciting.
the special ed funding formula. You can all thank me later for not bringing those pages downstairs. Basically,
You still awake?
it is I want to say it's a 7-step formula.
7?
They're looking at various calculations, but in a nutshell, they're basically doing a comparison. The comparison is basically net expenditures from the last year that we completed. So it would be 24-25. And it's subtracting out, so if we have expenditures, it subtracts out any main care revenue that you received. So we do not have any main care revenue, so it doesn't subtract anything. So when we talk about main care, the reason that we don't bill, there's a lot of reasons why we don't bill. And if you've been watching the newspapers lately, that's one of the reasons we don't bill. But at the end of the day, we end up in the same place. It's not like you get all of the money plus your main care revenue. Basically, they net it out. So you're in the same place. So the state is looking at a comparison, and I'm gonna oversimplify this. So the first comparison is your net expenditures. And then the second comparison is basically, they're looking at your special ed student count. So the state sets a prevalence rate of 15%, and Katie and I were looking at last year. And I don't have, I don't remember the exact counts, but it basically takes, in this count that we do on October 1st, it has a count of your special ed kids. This prevalence rate that the state said is 15%, and if you ask them where they get that, they can't even tell you, but it's the prevalence rate has not changed since we've been doing EPS. So it's supposedly the prevalence rate of special ed, but nobody can tell you of what or of where, it just is. So all of these kids, so if it basically calculates 15% of your students, and if your special ed count is above that, it basically puts students into 2 buckets. So anything under 15% gets, you basically, the year that we looked at, it's basically a weighted special ed count. So in the year that we looked at, for the 15% of special ed kids that we had, we were getting about $11,000 for each of those students. For all of the special ed students over the 15% special ed rate, you get a per student cost, or the special ed bucket, of about $3,000. So there's quite a huge difference between being under the 15% and being over the 15%. Again, there doesn't seem to be a rhyme or reason where this 15% comes from, but that's what they're using. Honestly, I think if they looked at current prevalence rates, I think they would have increased from the time that they started doing EPS, but they have not changed them. So it's basically looking at, if you do that calculation for the students based on the 15% and those over the 15% versus your net expenditures, and there's some tweaks in there. It looks at high out of cost district students. So basically for those students that we send to special purpose private schools, the state will throw back in our funding formula the cost we pay over a certain percentage for private schools. They will also throw back a larger amount if we send those students to regional programs because they deem them more cost effective. So there are additions to, it also adds in money for high cost district students. So the first year that they were here, they gathered, or the first year of EPS, they gathered information about high in district students. So if you had students that were high cost, it was reported. And then every year after that, they stopped capturing the data. However, if you were lucky enough to report that you had high index cost students in the first year, you have gotten a basically an inflation factor for every year since that happened. And there's no rhyme or reason. They don't tie it to anything. They haven't stopped it because, again, if they change one thing in the funding formula, everything changes, right? So they've just kind of left this high in district part of the formula in there, even though it's not tied to anything and they can't tie it to anything. I feel bad for those districts who did not report that they had high in districts students the first year because they haven't gotten any. They haven't added any funds for their special ed kids since. So basically these two comparisons, you get the higher of the two. For us, the higher of the two is our net expenditures. So after you do their huge long formula based on our expenditures, they throw $4,135,706 into our EPS bucket. And if you are really interested in the special ed funding formula, I'd be happy to provide the pages for this. Katie and I were having quite a lot of fun in my office trying to tie these numbers. It's quite a formula.
I do have one question.
Sure.
So 11,000 something goes to special ed students.
So
Is
it's,
that in addition
Yes.
to
yes, so it's,
the pupil?
they've already added, these kids are already counted on in section 1 and 2.
The regular
This
ed?
is additional money for the same, for special ed students.
Yeah.
And that $11,000 figure changes. It's basically a combination figure between elementary and it's a blended rate between elementary and secondary.
Yeah.
And that $11,000 figure changes every year. So it's a factor, obviously, if our regular tuition is, would we say 8,000, it's clearly much higher than that. It's got a huge weight to it, right?
Yep.
Right?
Okay.
The next section is, I talked about this high cost out of district. So we have paid $266,000 more last year, above the special purpose private school figure that the state has set, and they're giving it back to us in our funding formula. Questions about that?
So that figure is based on what we have.
What, so twice a year, Sarah and I, we actually look at 2 reports from them. There's the 07 and the 14. One of them, they want us to estimate our cost for special purpose private school students. And you can, as you remember from our conversation, some of these tuition costs for these kids, you know, they can run between 80 and 100,000, not including transportation. So it depends where the students are placed. We probably have students placed, maybe 5 or 6 different programs throughout the state, and they're tracked. So the state wants on the 07, they want for us to estimate as they gear up to do their ED 279s, what they can expect for expenditures. And at the end of the year, when the year is done, we actually have to report on the same students, verifying the amount we have spent on these kids. And that's how this works.
This is where we're always a year behind on this,
Yep,
because we're reimbursing.
yeah, because it needs to be on the full year, so we're not looking at this year, we're actually looking at last year. Transportation, which is line 4, again, there is actually another funding formula for transportation. So in the first year that we had EPS, the state developed a transportation formula based on the number of miles traveled in districts. And every year, they have adjusted that by the same way they have adjusted, reach, gifted and talented. There's a multiplier there, right? So they're going to compare 2 different things. So they're going to compare this formula from, I don't know, let's say 2004, that's been inflated every year. That's one scenario versus your actual transportation expenditures. And then they do a variance. So they do, and don't quote me on this, I think, so it's actual transportation expenditures, and then I think they look at 110%, and I think they look at 90%. And they look at all of the formulas, and you actually get the lesser of all of them. So for ours, that is, it's either this or the lesser of the 90%. So that is where we are. And if anyone is interested in that, I'd be happy to find you those Excel sheets. Katie and I glanced at that just to give her a taste of it. Based on that EPS calculation, they threw 1.9 million and change into our bucket. So if you add all of that up, there's an additional, 6.5 and change in other subsidizable costs. The line below is what the state contributes for retirement to main PERS. I don't know how they calculate it. They calculate it based on normalized cost. So you'll see that they've added in $681,799. So if you add everything from the bottom of page 2 and everything that we just went through, now we are at $24,560,000. This is what the state says that our district needs based on our students to be equitable to other students, right? It's not to provide the best education, but it's to provide an equitable education across the state. Okay.
I have one question about the transportation costs. This would be the busing of students for academic purposes
So
only, correct?
They include actually 4 different types of transportation, and Katie and I talked about this. So they include what we call to and from transportation, basically transportation from home to school, right? Picking kids up on a regular route. They include vocational transportation in this model. So when we're transporting our students to CATC, that is included as part of the transportation. The other 2 that they provide is our transportation for homeless students. So if we have if we have an unhoused student from our district that is temporarily placed in, who temporarily moves with a family, moves to Augusta, they are still allowed to attend our district, and it's our responsibility, as well as the school, as the district in which they're currently residing, to split the transportation costs. So if we have a student who becomes unhoused and is living with family members in Augusta, we split those transportation costs with Augusta, 50-50. So that's picked up. The last transportation cost that we pick up is actually special ed transportation, and it's not transporting special ed to and from home, but it's actually transporting students from the district to special purpose private schools. So as we're transporting a student to Margaret Murphy, or we're transporting a student to Spurwink, is picking up those costs. And those can be very expensive because some of those students have, I don't want to call it specialized or individualized, maybe that's a better word, individualized transportation. So sometimes we may be transporting one student alone going to one of these places. Sometimes we only have one student who may be attending these schools and there's nobody else to transport. I know that Sarah looks to see if, we can partner with anybody. Sarah, do you want to add anything?
We do seek transportation cooperation or partnerships from other districts. So my directors group will reach out anytime we're transporting someone new to see if we can buddy up a ride anywhere as we can. And we do have, Andrea mentioned this, we do have a specific student who requires highly individualized transportation right now. It's a big part of our transportation budget out of district. I dare say it probably costs more than tuition.
Yeah. I think for that particular student, I think we're looking at transportation costs alone of $70,000. So in addition to the tuition, some of these special purpose private students, they can rack up quite a bill, which you can see why the state is kind of capping our tuition costs. It does not cap our transportation costs, however. So
It sounded like you had another question in there.
So basically, any transportation for extracurriculars or for sports, that's on the district in terms of our mill rate and what we have to.
it is included as part of extra and co-curricular. It's actually, if you're looking at the expenditure articles, that is actually housed in the same place as athletics. So athletic transportation sits in the same expenditure article. It is not captured by the state as transportation in their funding formula. Does that answer your question? Sometimes I feel like I
The
talk.
state's not paying for it.
It is not included, well, they pay for extra and co-curricular, there is money in here, however, it is not included as part of that subsidizable cost of transportation in this model. So, I mean, if you look back at page 1, where we were playing with the, it does provide, what are we looking at?
Section D,
Yeah,
number
section
5.
D, $50 per elementary student and $150 for a 9 to 12 student. That, you're right, that's basically a drop in the bucket for some of our extracurricular programs. So there is funding.
Just not.
No.
Okay, so
It goes back to that PICUS study that they did. A lot of the funding or a lot of this is deemed to be inadequate. But the state, this is what they're choosing to live with rather than overhauling. I mean, there are a lot of demands on the legislature as far as, if you watch the discussions as far as budget this time of year. Education is just one other, anyway, it's just one other need, so. Anyway.
Why do we receive teacher retirement amounts? Why do we receive teacher retirement?
So I'm gonna talk to you to make sure that everybody understands about teachers and retirement. If you are a state worker or if you are a teacher in the state of Maine, as well as the following positions, school administrators, ed techs 2s, ed tech 3s, and most of our positions that require certification from the state, they are required to belong to Maine State Retirement, Maine Public Employees Retirement System, which means that these employees, we do not pay into Social Security for them. Basically, the state and the districts partner up and pay retirement costs, as well as these staff members also pay into retirement costs. So if you're on Social Security, you're basically paying 0.0765% of your salary, and the employer is matching that. for Medicare and FICA. FICA? Anyway. Sorry, I've been talking too long. The district does not do that for main PERS. So we pay a percentage, I think it's around 4% currently for our employees. For our main PERS employees, they also pay in the same percentage as Social Security, 0.0765. And then the state also picks up some of the retirement costs, which is what is included in here. It's basically retirement costs for those positions that are funded through our budget. I don't know how they come up with this calculation. So when employees retire, and if they've lived in main PERS all their life, they would not collect Social Security unless they had a spouse. So it's not this and that, it's an or, right? So the state does that. This main PERS members have, in addition to drawing on main PERS, the state also pays 60% of health insurance for the employee. So if I retire and I'm on main PERS and I'm not, the state will pay 60% of the employee's health insurance cost. The employee continues actually to be on our health insurance plan. I mean, we don't get billed for them, but it's as though they still belong to our plan because they're included on our medical loss ratio, but the state picks up 60% and the other 40% comes from their retirement. So there are definitely perks to being on main PERS, but the state, people can't choose one or the other. It is by statute who can and who can't belong. There are other school districts who have chosen to participate in basically a buy-in. You can, districts can choose or towns can choose to pay additional and have all their staff members covered under main PERS. That is not something that we do here. All the staff members who do not qualify for main PERS are covered by Social Security. So that was a very long explanation for your answer, but yes, it all goes towards the costs of the employees who are covered under main PERS.
Question. At 65, are they required to sign up for Medicare?
So what happens? So at 65, what happens, for those of you who don't know, employees who, believe it or not, so we're gonna go with another story. So it used to be that teacher members were exempt from paying into Medicare. So I have teacher members who are still here from that time who have never paid into Medicare. They will never qualify for Medicare. They will always carry private insurance. However, somewhere before I started, the law was changed, and basically it started requiring teacher members to pay into Medicare. So if you were a teacher Medicare before that date and you never changed your employment, you are still exempt from paying into Medicare. So we have staff members who have been here since before, who have not broken their connection to the district, who continue not to pay into main care. They will never pick up main care when they turn 65. But for everybody else, they have they are now contributing. So when staff members turn 65, typically what happens is staff members will enroll through Medicare through, not main care, Medicare through Social Security. And what people usually do at that time is you pick up Medicare and you pay for Medicare. And then people usually pick up a supplemental because Medicare doesn't cover all of health insurance costs. So most people pick up a supplemental. Our insurance offers a supplemental that people can only access once they become Medicare eligible. So they don't go off the state at that point then picks up the 60% of their main care supplemental. And the teacher or the member pays 40% plus the cost of main care, which is now approximately $200. Anyway, that's a very long explanation to your question.
Makes sense.
Does it make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's what goes on. All right, here we go. We're diving back in. Page, I don't know, are we on page 3? Page 3 or 4? Oh, 4, yay. All right, here we go. So this is when we start to talk about students and valuation and the other half of this funding formula. So in section A, you see our 4 towns, and we're talking about subsidizable students, so students who live in our district. So you can see that Gardner, for example, has 735 subsidizable pupils, and it's a 2-year average. You can see that from above. Pittston has 326 subsidizable students based on that 2-year average. Randolph has 158 and a half subsidizable students, and West Gardner has 517 and a half. Our total subsidizable 2-year average of students is 1737. And the next column over, you see each town's percentage of that total. So for example, Gardner's 735 students is 42.31% of the entire subsidizable students. So what the state then does is at the bottom of page 3, remember the bucket that we said was sitting with now 24,560,000. The state basically figures out what the cost to each of our municipalities would be based on the percentage of subsidizable students. I'm not sure why they go through this exercise, but I guess it's good to know. I mean, it's never made any of these towns pay for all of EPS, but I guess it's a good comparison. In section B is where we start talking about valuation. So you see our 4 towns listed, and you see the current valuation of where the state of Maine revenue values the valuation, the land and the property in each of these communities. The problem that we are having is that valuation is increasing still at a good rate. And while the state sees valuation as increasing, it sees towns' ability to pay. So this is not what each town says its valuation is, but what the state says the valuation of the town is. And the state uses their valuation because it wants to make sure that towns are valued equitably. The state doesn't have any or has little control over what the town says that its valuation is or how it values the property. So the state using their valuation is kind of the great equalizer, right? Comparing apples to apples as opposed to, each of our towns may have a different way that they value properties. So we're using the state valuation. So I'm going to, and I haven't yet, I have pulled down from the revenue website, basically the history of valuations of all towns in the state. And I think you can see like a 10-year valuation of how much these valuations for towns are increasing. If you look at page 5 of my comparison, you will see that, where am I? In the middle of the page, you can see the valuation for 2025, 2024, and 2023, and you see the 3-year average. This, the state EPS formula either uses a 3-year average or the previous year valuation, whichever is lower. For us, the 3-year valuation is lower than the previous year. So on another page, I think I have the increased valuation. Let me see which page that's on. So if you look at, let me see. I know I put that on here. I just need to figure out where I am. Oops.
So it's still in that same
Yeah,
section.
it's still in the
It's the
same
same.
section. I thought I did the percentage increase, but I don't think that I did. So you'll see where Gardner, for example, their valuation increased by 93 million from the last ED 279. I'm on page 5. I'm about the middle of the page, right below that blue line.
Yep,
You will see where Pittston's valuation increased since the last time we did this by 46 million and change. You will see where the state says that Randolph's 3-year valuation has increased by 17 million. And you will see where West Gardner's 3-year valuation has increased by 70,000. Somewhere in here, there are percentages of the increase. I thought they were quite hefty, but you will find it. So going back to the ED 279,
93 million.
Section B, the state valuation, that is where this comes from. And for FY 27, the state has set the mill expectation at 5.645%. So I'm in the middle in that section B. 5.645% is actually less than the mill expectation last year. But based on the increase in valuation, towns are required to raise additional funds. So if you look at the page that we were just looking on, and I know that I'm flipping back and forth, at the bottom, page 5, you will see where I show you the 3-year average for 24, 23, 22, which is last year's valuation, and then the 3-year average for 25, 24, 23, and the mill expectation for both, right? So if you look at the mill expectation at 6.10, even though the mill expectation is higher, we are still required to raise more this year because of the increase in valuation. In fact, the city of Gardner is required to raise 302,000 and change more because of their valuation. I know, crazy. The Pittston, you can see where they're required to raise 127,990. Randolph, they're required to raise an additional 40,816, and the town of West Gardner, 198,245. So even though the mill rate has decreased, our towns are required to raise an additional 669,000 based on the valuation and the mill rate. Questions? I know it's a lot. Huh?
Right off the bat.
Yep. So, going back, to the ED 279, you can see where, the total allocation by municipality. So you see where they're comparing if the 4 towns had to pick up the entire 24 million, how much it would cost, and the required local contribution by municipality. I think it's supposed to try to make you feel better about the 8.6 or the 8.8 million. It doesn't make me feel any better. It just,
Just a different number.
right, right. And then they break out up to the far right. They break out the state contribution for each town, based on the percentage. It really doesn't equate to anything. It's just one more thing. Flipping the page on the ED 279 model. So you see at the top, a bright red bar, the total allocation. So that is the figure when we got our pot, right? The local contribution, we figured based on the valuation times the new mill rate. So I told you that we are required to raise $8,863,214.50 based on our valuation and their mill rate. The way that the state contribution is determined is the allocation less the local contribution equals the state contribution. So if you do that math, 24 million and change minus the local contribution is equals what the state is going to give us. And when the first time I looked at the ED 279, I did the math quickly and I figured that we're losing about 210,000. But if you do the math, according to this, we're actually losing 300,000. And I couldn't figure out where that was coming from, but we're not. So the next section is I'm going to tell you why Katie participating in the Education Service Center is going to benefit us. So in the middle of the section B of the page that we're in, you will see an additional allocation of $104,115.56. That is additional money for us participating in that education center where Katie's a part of with that consortium of other superintendents who are looking for ways of consolidating or sharing services. That is a direct benefit to us. And that additional money is how we end up only being 200,000 shorter, 2,000 less in subsidy than we were in the current year. If you look at the percentage in the share in section D, you'll see that the local share of this 24 million is 36.09 and that the state share is 63.91. And you can see that below. One of the reasons why Katie and I were talking about this, it seems like a lot of math. The state's looking at other things. If you back up the page below, the page before, I know you really don't want to visit it. One of the things that the state is looking at, and you'll hear us talk about minimum receivers, basically the state wants to see, I was joking about making us feel better about not picking up the entire cost. One of the things what the state wants to look at is based on your valuation, whether the towns can pick up the entire cost of education as calculated. And there are communities that can do that. So if you're looking at a community on the coast where valuations are really high, sometimes they're able to raise more than the calculation that's created by the state through this formula. Those districts do not then get the ED 279 share or the EPS share. They get what's called a minimum receiver. The state gives them much less. So your reward for having high valuation is that you get less from the state. So we talk about these minimum receivers. They still have to provide programs the same way that we do, but because their valuations are so high, they do not get the same percentage of state subsidy as the rest of us. The last page on this is basically a breakout of our payments. One thing I want to tell you is you'll hear me talk about, or you'll hear Sarah and I talk about seed money. So seed money as it relates, and I'm telling you the story because it directly relates to our subsidy from the state. Seed costs are costs that we pay. They're basically main care costs. So those students that are main care eligible who are being sent to our special private purpose schools, they're able to get additional main care services, specifically things like speech and language, OTPT, and some of these community-based services. And there's been a lot of things that are in the news lately about the federal government coming in and doing a main care audit and deeming some of these community services that are being billed to main care are ineligible. That's a whole other story. But the reason that I'm telling you this is when somebody is main care eligible, traditionally the federal government will pay a percentage. I want to say it hovers around 60%, and typically main care, the state of Maine Department of Human Services pays for the the other percentage, right? But for schools, when we're sending our students, DHHS is not responsible for the other percentage, basically the school district is. So 4 times a year, we receive our main care billing from the state, basically their main care payments that were paid to providers. And basically that percentage that would typically be picked up by DHHS is basically it is basically paid on our behalf, and our subsidy is reduced throughout the year. So what you're seeing that we're getting, they actually reduce these main care payments. And Sarah and I have been talking about it. What we do is that we try to budget in anticipation of these payments, so it's net neutral, right? So, but what we're seeing is this seed money, these quarterly payments that we're making, I am starting to see them increasing exponentially. We're looking at paying, it used to be years ago about $40,000 a quarter, and it doesn't sound like a lot, but now it's increasing to about $65,000 or $70,000 a quarter. So it's starting to add up, and you'll see where Sarah and I will be increasing our main care seed expenditures, or our seed budget in our budget to try to mitigate for these expenses or these payments that will be deducted from our subsidy. Anyway, questions about that? Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, so we're looking at a budget of 24 million, but our actual budget, of course, is 32, and I can see that we have additional revenue. So the towns have to pick up the difference between that above and beyond just our contribution on the EDS.
So to put everything in perspective, I've given you 2 additional loose pages, okay? So one of them at the top of it says, MSAD11 FY26, our requested budget worksheet. This is actually the budget that we passed for this year. So you'll see at the top, I'm talking on the right hand, for this budget worksheet, you'll see the 25 budget, and then below it, you'll see the 26 budget, and then you'll see the increase. So that you'll see on this form that for this year, we requested 32.8 million, right? Which is a lot more than the 24 million. And part of it is, we talked about this. The state doesn't make any provisions for school districts that operate 6 schools. They give you the same amount whether you operate 4 elementary schools as operating 1, right? So that's where part of the additional for exceeding EPS is. So you'll see on this sheet, our budget for this year was 32.8 million. You will see below that a $2.8 million figure. And where that comes from is miscellaneous revenue that I expect to get from other sources other than the local towns and the state. And where you see where that comes from is if you look slightly to the left, you'll see miscellaneous revenue. And I start talking about where we're getting our other revenues from. The first 2 that you see, the first one that you see is special ed reserve account, and carry forward is part of our unallocated fund balance. We're using money that we have in our unallocated fund balance to actually buy down the amount that the locals have to contribute. And we keep that on the side. And you heard Nick talk about having unallocated fund balance. There are years in the past where the state has given us our subsidy, and halfway through the year, maybe revenues at the state did not come in as expected. And so halfway through the year, the state would say, we are cutting your subsidy. It's called a curtailment. I have lived through several of them. We haven't had them in recent years, but they do exist. It exists when the state is operating on hard times. It is in situations like that, and for us to be to have funds sitting there to be able to plan for years ahead. So this year, because our enrollment is declining, we're seeing additional a reduction in state subsidy. We could talk about using additional monies from subsidy, but what we're seeing is as our budgets get tighter and tighter, our carryover is reducing. And what I will share with you at another meeting, another budget meeting, is as we track out, as I track out our unallocated fund balance, there's a point where that's going to be drying up. So we talk about, I mean, for those of you who've read the problems with Augusta and the problems that they have had with fund balance and what happens when you run out of fund balance. Either you do a lot of cutting or there's a lot of additional being charged to locals. So having an unallocated fund balance, the only thing that we can use unallocated fund balance is to buy down, is to use it to use it in the same situation, to apply to a future budget year to reduce the amount to locals. I cannot say, well, we need a new tractor. We're going to use unallocated fund balance to go buy a new tractor. We are not allowed to do that. We do not operate by the same rules as cities and towns. We operate under statute. Statute regulates what this fund balance can be used for, and it can only be used to buy down or used as revenue in a future budget year. So we kind of guard our fund balance. I completely get what Nick was talking about. So when you see huge reductions in subsidy, you need to find a way to mitigate. We just can't go in and slash 20 teachers. It's just hard in a district of this size to do that. So it gives us time to figure things out. Okay. So miscellaneous revenue, going back to this, the first two come from unallocated fund balance. State agency client tuition, that is special ed kids who are wards of the state, who are placed in our district, who do not reside in this district. They are special ed kids. Sarah bills the state for those. We get in SAC monies from the state for those students. They may spend a short time here, they may spend a long time here, but Sarah bills for those on a monthly basis and we receive SAC revenue. Student may be here today, gone tomorrow. It's just an estimate. Tuition estimate, I talked about tuition during, when we were talking about this, I talked about tuition kids. We do have tuition kids. Most of our tuition kids come from RSU-12 who do not have a high school. They tuition all of our kids here. We bill tuition to these to the RSU-12 twice a year. The midway point at the end of the year, the Department of Education regulates the tuition rate that districts are allowed to charge. It's based on your expenditures. So all this information that they gather from us, they create both an elementary and a secondary tuition rate. We're allowed to bill them that rate, and we are also allowed to pass along any special ed costs. So Sarah, if we have tuition students who have special ed, Sarah will estimate our special ed costs, and we also bill them for that. Okay. Interest, we get $300,000 a year in interest from Kennebec Savings. We get about $25,000, depending, $25,000 a month. We need to make sure that our cash is available as we need it, and we have to be very careful about. We cannot go investing money. Our funds in risky investments. So basically, we are limited to where we can invest. Kennebec Savings has been great to us as far as the interest rate we earn on the funds we have. Miscellaneous revenue, that is miscellaneous revenue that we get in from unexpected things. That again is an estimate. Transportation fees, so while the board covers extra athletic trips, this board decided years ago that it does not fund co-curricular trips. for students. So either PTAs or it's mostly PTAs, parent-teacher groups. So we provide the funding, they provide the revenue, we bill them, and we get revenue in for those. It's mostly co-curricular. We do not provide transportation to other units outside of the district, so it's just us transporting our kids in some capacity. Athletic gate receipts, so in your policy, we are required to collect gate receipts from the musical, from gate admissions, from football, from basketball. There's only one program that we are not currently collecting gate receipts from. We will talk about that probably at some point, but that is included as miscellaneous revenue. The last thing that I included is the district belongs to a program with competitive energy services. We are in a program, basically has to do with clean energy. We're in a huge consortium with the likes of Bowdoin and Kobe and Maine General. And basically we get energy credits based on this consortium. And we get to sell our renewable energy credits in addition to getting credits from the energy that these programs have, the energy they create. So we get about $10,000 in that, plus we get reductions on our energy bills. So the total miscellaneous revenue that you see matches, thankfully, with the miscellaneous revenue off to the right-hand side. So you see your budget, and once you subtract the miscellaneous revenue, we have a budget of 30 million and change that needed to be funded for this year. So the next set of, the next line, you can see what the required contribution was. So for this year, the required contributions of the towns was 8,193,520. Our state subsidy was 16,011,518.51. If you looked at, remember I said the kitty that added up that last year, that's the amount that our kitty ended up, and that is the distribution. Once you subtract that from the net budget to be funded, the remaining is the additional local. This is the amount that the locals need to pick up over and above EPS. So below, we're starting in the blue bars. I have given you the valuations for, it was not last year, but the year before. Remember, this is the budget for this year, and the valuation based on ED 279 we received for the current year. Based on that valuation, and it's on this that you can see the increase. So you can see that Gardner's valuation changed from one ED 279 to the other to the next year by about 15%. The same with Pittston, it increased about 15.586%. You see where Randolph's 3-year valuation went up 14% and change. And you see where West Gardner's valuation went up 17.8%. The next column over is you see each town's percentage of the whole valuation. So for last year, Gardner's percentage was 36.5%, and you can see the others, the 4 towns together, their valuation, the percentage of the whole obviously totals 100. This is how the percentage of each town is out. The percentage of our budget that is allocated to each town is determined by those percentage of valuations. So as you can see, Gardner picks up 36.5% of the required from above, and then it also picks up that same 36.5% of that additional local, that 5.8 million. So if you look over to the far right, you can see for this year, the local required contribution with the additional local contribution meant that Gardner's contribution for this year's budget was $5,119,991.44. And you can do the same for all the 4 towns across. The last blue set of lines is basically a comparison between the budget that we passed for this year and the previous budget. It's basically to show you the increase to the towns. So the increase from the 2025 budget to the 2026 budget, the 4 towns picked up an additional $583,000 or 4.34% increase. Okay, so this is the budget that we're living with this current year. This is actually what happened. So what I did is to give you a comparison. I basically kept everything the same for the other sheet that I did. So you have another sheet that says FY27 EPS comparison. So if we kept everything the same for this year's budget, I mean everything, but the only thing that I'm actually changing is our state subsidy. You will see that if we had the same budget as the current year, that towns would be required to pick up that $210,000 figure right off the gate with nothing else changing. That is a 0 flat budget. And I did that so that you could see the comparison. So you see where, and you can see based on this other sheet where the bulk of the increase is heading. It's heading to Gardner. So of that $210,000 that the 4 towns would pick up, Gardner would pick up based on their valuation, they would pick up $170,000 of it. You can see where Pittston would pick up $15,000. Randolph would actually see a decrease of $13,000, and West Gardner would see an increase of about $37,000. So based on our subsidy allocation, the towns would be required to pick up an additional 1.5%. Now, as we add to the budget, any increases that we pass along would be sent to these 4 towns proportionally according to their valuation, okay? So you keep thinking, so one year we tried to get, I don't remember how long ago, we tried to get all the towns under a certain amount. Because it's proportional, we had to keep cutting a lot because the decrease was proportional to get a specific town to where we wanted to see their increase. So it's hard when you try to jiggy it because of the proportionality of the valuations. Any questions? I know I've thrown a lot of figures at you. I thank you for being attentive. I know it's a lot, but as we go through our budget discussions, I want you to understand how our funding works and how one thing affects another, and you'll hear us talk about it. Questions?
I just know that my mortgage went up quite a bit because of the taxes.
It is not a MSAD11 problem. I do not live in this community. I live in Waterville, and my taxes for last year or this year went up $600. So I'm feeling it too. For those of you who want a basis, I live in a 1,200 square foot home on less a third of an acre. So I certainly don't live in a large house. So and if you watch the news, there are conversations going on because it's not just a Gardner problem. It's not an MSAD11 problem. It's not a Waterville problem. It's a way that we are funding our schools problem. Valuation, and you'll hear me talk about this, because valuation does not equate to somebody's ability to pay. So because you have valuation in your home does not mean that you're able to provide taxes. So right now, the state has a group that is looking at a way to find a way to mitigate the pressure that schools specifically in towns are putting on our taxpayers because it's becoming such a problem. These valuations are baked into this formula, and as our home prices increase on paper, so is the amount that the locals are required to pick up, and it's becoming a problem. Questions? I know I've asked 3 times.
So right off the bat, applied last year's budget to this year, it's a 1.5% increase already.
Not
Not
even
even-
adding
yeah.
anything,
Not
so
adding,
Not
not
adding.
not adding, not cutting, not doing
Basically.
anything.
Or just increases, just
And we know
210.
basic increases.
that healthcare is going up. We know that, with the minimum, requirements for compensation. Teacher salaries are going up, administrative salaries are going up, everything is going up. So what are we gonna cut?
When we did the state of the schools, you heard this, you heard the administrators talking about the challenges that we're having, the mental health challenges. Not having a nurse in a building. I mean, Katie knows what it's like living on the ground level. It's easy for me to say. I don't deal with it day to day. I hear about it. It's difficult. There's a lot of difficulties. Maybe do you wanna?
I was just going to add, we're going to have to make some really hard decisions because we want opportunities for our students. We know what they deserve, and the bottom line is we are going to have to make hard decisions to do right by our students at all levels and be fiscally responsible to our communities. So the administrative team is prepared to have to continue having hard conversations and make tough decisions, and we'll certainly be bringing those to you. This is just the start. Andrea, thank you. Your expertise and knowing this formula inside and out, regardless of where any of the percentages come from, which is the mystery, is really, really puts us at an advantage to at least understand it.
Our budget for next year has yet to, it's not fully built. We have everything that we need. We have the requests from the schools. Over vacation, Katie and I will be working together to pull it together. She will then start meeting with administrators to review their budgets, to look at any changes that she's recommending before it comes to the board. I anticipate that we will have the budget to you probably the first week of March. And typically March is the month where we have weekly finance meetings. We typically meet every Tuesday for the month of March into April. Our budget needs to be set by the middle of April, so that's really not a lot of time to get where we need to be. But there will be a lot of conversation between now and then.
A lot.
And our full administrative team attends those weekly meetings. Just helps everybody be on the same page about the state of our budget and advocacy and priorities, and they're great people to have in the room for questions that come up.
Absolutely.
Anything
Thank you.
else? Oh, we're not done with our agenda.
We're not, we
Sorry.
have another
Sorry.
item.
We do.
I'm ready to wrap it up.
Yep, here we
The
go.
last item on the agenda is, now we're talking about how expensive things cost. I would
School
like,
lunch program.
right? So the school lunch program is not actually part of our general budget. It runs in a fund of its own. Actually, since the state has began covering the cost of breakfast and lunch for students, the district is no longer having to contribute to budget in its general budget to help fund the school lunch program. It's actually able to fund itself. During negotiations, one of the recurring themes was that we are unable to find individuals to substitute in our school lunch program, unlike somebody not being able to find a substitute in facilities. Just because somebody is out doesn't mean that we can
Not.
not feed
Fine.
students for the day.
Right.
And when you have two people in the kitchen who are feeding a building and one of them is out, it becomes a problem. So since the school budget is funded on its own and there is a little bit of money, and no, we can't transfer from that into the budget. It needs to be completely separate as it's required to be. I am asking for the board to consider budgeting a full-time sub for the lunch program. It will help with the problem that we heard through negotiations. It will also help because one of the things that was negotiated is when these school lunch, when these school lunch, when these school
The
School
cafeteria
kitchens,
ladies.
there we go.
The
School
kitchen-
kitchens run short,
Yeah.
that we are now required, so if somebody's out, that we are now required to give those people who are picking up the slack additional. It would help if we had a full-time sub that could travel through the district, who would be able to sub so that it would mitigate us having to pay those additional costs to everyone in the kitchen when somebody's out. I don't know how to better say it. I'm tired and I apologize.
And it's
I'm
another
not
set of
communicating it. It is also
hands,
going
you
to
know,
help
so.
for them to get lunches out when they need to.
And it's a sub who's on the same level.
So what we would
So
be
make it
looking at
easier.
is either a 2 or 4 hour person. The person with 2 or 4 hour person would not be entitled to benefits.
Yeah.
What we would do is rotate that person through the district so they would be familiar with each of the kitchens. And as if somebody was out, then that person would be redirected to fill the vacancy. So I'm asking for you to vote because you need to bring it to the full board to create a position. I think it would be a good use of funds. I think it would help. And I think it would help morale. As I said, it was a constant in our negotiations. We can't find people to work, far less to sub. So
Not only that, but being a sub with experience, not having to retrain the sub every time there's a sub.
That's why just pulling in, which you can't find a sub,
Right.
but they're coming in not knowing how to do that job.
Right.
So this would keep one person that can be moved around.
and it would help mitigate the new language that's in the contract. Obviously, paying somebody additional to work in a kitchen that's shorthanded isn't going to help with the work. It would being compensated for having to do double duty, I get it, but it would be better to find a pair of hands that would help them. And that is what this proposes helping with.
We'd like to try.
Yep.
We would like to try.
Thanks, Molly.
Second that.
Thank you.
Questions or comments? It came up at every negotiations meeting, it came up that they just need help. And they can't.
Well,
find
they ran shorthanded for a
Yep.
long while this spring,
several
or
months.
this fall.
Yes.
We talk about, there was conversations about ed techs being shorthanded. There were conversations about facilities being shorthanded. Sadly, when facilities are shorthanded, we're paying somebody time and a half to pick up, to clean the other half of the building of the person who's not there. So, I mean, it affects us. For now, I'm only proposing adding a full-time sub for school nutrition because it won't affect our general budget.
Yep.
And because I know that the school nutrition budget can
Separate.
sustain it.
All right, all those in favor?
Thank you. We will bring it to the full board.
So
Thank you.
future agenda items?
Budget and budget.
Budget and more budget.
Is there anything else that anyone would like added to the commit?
I did make note of the purple sheets.
Yeah.
We'll bring the purple sheet.
I will share
And that's
them.
just
I don't
called
know
the
that I can
purple
go
sheet,
over
right?
everything, but I'd be happy to provide them.
You mentioned the 10 years.
The evaluations.
Yeah.
Hey, what's your name? Katie. Katie, would you, on that same email, would you ask me to share with them to put in, I will put everything I've given out, I will put it in an electronic folder so that you're
Yes.
able to access, but I will also share that valuation history, the main revenue for each of the towns so that you can see the increases from year to year and where that comes from. So I will add that to
It
the
has
folder.
changed, and you've done that 10-year overlook to.
So you're talking about the
This is a
10-year
different thing,
overview
yeah.
of where, of our budgets from year to year. I will provide that once we have our budgets, so taxpayers can see how much we've asked them.
That'll be when you look at how many students we had then versus our declining enrollment, that's gonna paint a different picture. It doesn't change our responsibilities any, but it's gonna paint a different picture.
I will definitely do that towards the end of our budget season so people can see. And I can, so that we can actually add this year onto that sheet. I can provide last year's sheet that will provide everything through the current year.
Yay.
So is it Tuesdays starting March 3rd?
It's likely, but we'll know a little bit. We'll know by the week we return from break, so
Break.
stay tuned, Molly. It's
Okay.
likely, I mean, it's
Because
possible.
that would be before our next board meeting.
Yes.
For next, yes.
I would say.
It would probably be- I would say after our next finance committee meeting.
Their next,
Board meeting is the 5th.
yep, I would say probably the next one.
Yeah.
Yep. To give us a little bit of time.
Yep.
To finish. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for,
Always
for,
Meeting adjourned?
yep.
Yes, meeting adjourned, thank you.
numbers.